make a quick announcement. Most of you know me as a professor, as an academic, and there's a tradition in academia that when you leave an institution, you get to give a last lecture. And this is sort of what I'm going to do today, insofar as I'm going to talk about some of the broader issues and agendas within crowdfunding. And I'm going to use the term in an extremely broad sense, which is very different than most of the conversations we've been having today. I'd say 95% of the conversations have been focused on, capital formation for small businesses, SME, sometimes growing, scaling companies. There's a whole dimension of crowdfunding which doesn't get sufficient recognition in our industry and isn't being talked about sufficiently. And even though I'm a founder of CFPA and CIFRA, I think both organizations need to step up a little bit in terms of broader systemic engagement. Sam's done a wonderful job revitalizing and turning around CFPA this year, so kudos to Sam, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. He's an attorney, which means he bills by the hour, and so the hundreds of hours that he has spent running CFPA is literally time and money out of his pocket. So he's invested a significant amount into this. Let's talk about crowdfunding. I'm going to go very fast, and I don't have any data charts, I'm sorry. I typically have data charts. So I'm not going to talk about data, I'm going to talk about where this industry is going, what's happening. And I've recently been consuming a lot of Seth Godin. I think I'm reading his entire collection of small books, but so I'm going to tell you a lot of little stories as opposed to talking about data. And the stories are about conversations I've had, and these conversations are not about the fact that I'm having these conversations, it's about the level of discourse which is happening and how we as an industry need to affect and guide that discourse. So let's get started here. So collaboration economy, I'm not going to go into the Uberification of the world, but crowdfunding is a very small part of a much larger fintech revolution. And I see crowdfunding being one specific use case or application of a much broader push towards decentralization and deinstitutionalization of access to resources, of which finance is one of those. We also are living in an era post-2008 where there's fundamental distrust of government, Congress, banks, insurance agencies, any traditional institution. Millennials fundamentally distrust. And millennials also don't really understand the world very well. So I'll give you an example. A recent survey was done asking about the fintech space and peer-to-peer lending. Would you rather have a root canal or open an account at a physical bank? 93%, I'm not making this up, so I'm going to give you one statistic. 93% of millennials chose the root canal, which means they've never had a root canal. But that's it's an expression of their level of antipathy towards traditional institutions. So as that generation matures into mid-level management and actually starts having capital, what is that going to mean for our financial institutions in America? Secondly, and Karen Kerrigan is here, she's done phenomenal work, and others in the room are aware of the policy level work, but we are in the 30th year of decreased bank lending to small businesses in America, not 30th year, 50th year, 10th year, the 30th year in a row that the percentage of lending as a percentage of portfolios of bank lending has decreased in the United States, and there are areas of America that are unbanked. Literally unbanked. Secondly, the whole issue of developmental economics. Now, I was the primary author of the World Bank report on crowdfunding. Many of you have read it. I'm an academic, so I have the right to change my mind. I would basically tear it up and start over if I had that right. So the $90 to $96 billion figure that you all keep citing is wrong. And the subtext that you keep missing is 48 billion of that was assuming China legalized equity crowdfunding. And China has not legalized equity crowdfunding and probably won't anytime soon. So the next issue is philanthropy. There's a group called the Consultative Group to Aid the Poor. Anybody in this room know of them? CGAP. One person, okay. CGAP has 34 member institutions, including the World Bank, all 17 development banks, United Nations, Rockefeller, Gates. It's a huge organization that basically touches all of the financial inclusion bodies in the world. 2016 is the year of crowdfunding in CGAP. And they've decided crowdfunding is their key initiative to mobilize access to resources for the world's poor. We're not part of that conversation. We need to be informing that organization, and I just started that conversation 2 days ago, about best practices. As an industry, we have not developed best practices, a common body of knowledge. We have not come up with any organized sets of knowledge about our own practices that can be translated into other domains or communities of practice. The good news is that as an academic, even though I'm leaving Berkeley, Stanford, kudos to Stanford. Someone is here from Stanford. You guys are showing some interest. Not alumni active, Sam.
And take the list.
Wharton, Harvard, MIT, Chicago, Cambridge, Oxford, London School of Economics, INSEAD, IMD, and a few other ones are now doing crowdfunding research. So many of the larger universities are starting to really pick up the ball and starting to look at the issue. There are now over 2,000 papers in the academic literature talking about crowdfunding. Over 86% of those are from Europe because they were many, many, many years ahead of us. So their faculty are better, their research is better, their financial models are better, and their governance and regulatory models are exceptionally better compared to ours. But the good news is, if I had to make a prediction, it's going to be Chicago. The Booth School seems to be showing the most interest right now. Chicago will probably become the head institution in crowdfunding because they run the National Bureau of Economics Research, and they're sort of developing like a mini NBER to study crowdfunding. So that's really good news. The challenge is no one's funding that. The US government's not funding that, and no major philanthropies are yet funding that, so we're all bootstrapping. You don't get tenure bootstrapping. Those of you who don't understand the game of academia, today it's about how much money can you bring in as a professor to support your work. So as an industry, we need to figure out how to get philanthropic organizations or corporations to start writing checks to fund research. And I've been involved in dozens of policy meetings in the last 3 years here in DC and New York, and I'll tell you, the reason that the government calls me is not that I'm smarter than other people in the room, it's that I have the magic 3 letters after my name, PhD. The theory is I know what I'm talking about because I'm an academic. They will not listen to industry anywhere to the extent they're going to listen to the academic community, so as we can actually guide the development of research, we can guide the development of policy. But we won't have an effective voice in policy if we can't document our arguments with data, which is the policy guidance. In corporate engagement, I wrote a book which no one has read on corporate crowdfunding. I think I'm a couple years ahead of my time, but there's a lot of interest from corporations in how do you externalize innovation. So there's a whole idea of open innovation, which has been talked about for 15 years. Crowdfunding is becoming the first instance where corporations are thinking, oh, this is how you do it. So there's going to be this whole interplay between corporate social responsibility and open innovation, and crowdfunding coming soon to a story near you. Let's take our little culture clash. I spent time on the West Coast and on the East Coast. Surprise, surprise, 2 different world sets. The West Coast is design thinking, innovation, break it quickly. This is design thinking, D-School model from Stanford. East Coast is leadership practices, governance structures, corporate laws, policy, and it's 2 separate languages, 2 separate cultures, and a lot of the leadership in fintech and a lot of the leadership in crowdfunding is from the West Coast, and they show up on the East Coast and never the twain shall meet. So there has to be some bridge making between translating the iterative models and thinking that we use in crowdfunding into a language that people here making policy in DC can understand. These are conversations we had. Bill Gates and I had a chat. Bill said, how do I use crowdfunding to make lemonade out of lemons? Translation, can we use crowdfunding as a way of mobilizing resources in a natural disaster and emergency? 2 is, he funds dozens or hundreds of incubators and accelerators in the world, most of which have terrible outcomes, ridiculously poor outcomes. Can you use crowdfunding to either increase the access to capital if these entrepreneurs are trying to help, and or can you use crowdfunding as a way of doing market testing to validate which companies we should be supporting? And or, if we were going to go into a country and we're looking at doing a local impact project, can we use crowdfunding to predict local support for a local initiative, going to Amy's work? So that's the direction Bill Gates Foundation is looking at. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter and I had a chat 2 weeks before he became Secretary of Defense. He had like a 1-month break when he was Deputy Secretary, and then he became Secretary again. There was this narrow window when he wasn't a Secretary of Defense. Now the number 2 man in the Pentagon calls me, and I'm like, what in the hell are you calling me for? Basically, I don't, I'm not Lockheed. What are you calling me for? And he said, I want to understand Prosper, Lending Club, and crowdfunding. Why? He said, I've been studying the collapse of small banking, small businesses in America. I believe, don't quote me please, a couple reporters in the room, so this is paraphrased, the lack of access to capital in small businesses is a greater threat to the continuity of our nation than terrorism. And this is the man who's now Secretary of Defense. So we have a really big problem, which crowdfunding is certainly not the panacea that's going to solve all of those issues, but that point is very senior policymakers, very senior people in government are addressing quietly this challenge. Some people say it's fine, good companies get funded, if you have good potential, you're going to find an investor. BS. academic language there. There's a massive gap in access to capital, especially for persons of color, women, underserved populations, veterans. Compound that with one of the world's worst academic systems and educational systems, and compound that with a functionally, financially illiterate population who reads at an average of 7th grade level, and we have people becoming entrepreneurs that are financially illiterate and that can't access training very effectively. So one of the things, Philip Zyclo was chairman of the 9/11 Commission. He's a friend of mine. He's also a senior diplomat, great guy. So he and I worked on a project called Rework America. If anybody wants to read a bipartisan blueprint for how to actually turn our economy around, it's a book called Rework America. It came out a few months ago. And it's literally bipartisan, which is rare in this town. I worked on the access to finance piece of that. But Philip truly believes that the national priority should be business development in America. Coupled with educational improvement. Those two are like the two pillars of restoring America. He wants to understand how crowdfunding alternative finance can mobilize that. Now Europe gets it. Europe explicitly says, the European Commission, crowdfunding is integral to the European economy and to the evolution and growth of small businesses in Europe by 2020. It's a national and transnational priority for the European Commission. The British government is investing tens of millions of pounds in it, while the US dithers. So I want you to understand what we're doing here in the US is not informed by energy, is not informed by facts, is not informed by data. It's informed by this political rhetoric, which is a spillover from the poisonous environment we have here in DC. 2 days ago, I was talking to chairman of the Indian version of the Federal Reserve Bank. First question he asked me was, do you have any data at all that shows that crowdfunding actually makes a difference anywhere? How would you answer that? There is data. There's a lot of data out there. Most people aren't aware of it and they're not tracking it. But the problem is when I say crowdfunding, is it crowdfinance? Is it equity finance? Is it peer? Is it micro-lending? There's no nomenclature. There's no standardization of definitions. So everyone's talking about different things internationally. Crowdfunding in China is very different than crowdfunding in Jakarta, is very different than crowdfunding in Johannesburg, is very different than crowdfunding in Amsterdam. Okay? So there's no standardization, and everyone's talking about different things. So there's a massive amount of confusion. So we need to standardize it. But the good news is there is data, and the most significant impact is it's helping women. There's a lot of good, reliable data that crowdfunding is helping women entrepreneurship in America, and it's almost the reverse of the homophily effects in venture capital, where women sometimes are more likely to get funded than men. The challenge is, to the women in the audience, you set your goals way too low. You ask for a lot less money than men, but you're actually statistically, you're more likely to get your money. So up your ante. So what I explained to the Indian government, though, is they thought of crowdfunding as an online distribution of an offering with a one-way communication between the issuer and the investor. And in their models, they didn't allow communication between potential investors, which I call the triangulation. So they're actually going to change their laws now to allow and actually require investors to be able to talk to each other. So they had missed the whole social interaction piece of equity crowdfunding. So the point is, where does the head of the Indian Federal Reserve Board go to get that information? Who tells that gentleman how crowdfunding works? Nobody. That document doesn't exist. That book doesn't exist. Information is not out there. Chairman of the International Center for Non-for-Profit Law. Interesting conversation. He said the challenge of crowdfunding is that it's too damn effective at building democracy. I was like, what do you mean by that? He said, a lot of third world countries are starting to talk about regulating crowdfunding out of existence. I was like, what? What? No. They're all talking about making crowdfunding work. He says, no. You're not a lawyer. You're not in the right rooms. You don't have the right conversations. Other countries are thinking about restricting crowdfunding because it's a threat to the totalitarian regimes, because it allows citizens to have communication and raise funds in ways that they don't have control over. So we talk about democratization of access to finance here in the US. In some parts of the world, it literally is democratization of access to finance, and it's coming under pressure and under threat internationally. So this is all about community. Crowdfunding is about building communities. So the first thing is, I'm not going to get boring, it's what's called communities of practice, literature. How do we, as the experts in the field, mentor the next generation? How do we transfer best practices? How can we create a body of knowledge and transfer that? Crowdfunding relies upon a community of influence. That community of influence can be based on gender, can be based on sexual orientation, can be based on going to the University of Georgia football. It doesn't matter what your passion is, but ultimately crowdfunding has to rely upon galvanizing people's passions around impact. Then the other interesting development is community crowdfunding. I'll give you an example. We talk about national, global, and state level issues. Let's talk about city level crowdfunding regulation. The city of Oakland in California recently passed a law that any large-scale real estate development or any public-private partnership must include in its proposal a discussion of how they will use real estate crowdfunding to allow the citizens of Oakland to participate in economic development through revitalization of real estate. I had no idea until a reporter called me and said, what are they doing? I literally had to go look it out. There are projects where citizens are crowdfunding municipal infrastructure, swimming pools, parks, swing sets, as a follow-on to a failed bond issue. So the question then is, if the citizens use GoFundMe to build a playground, who has the legal liability to fund and maintain the playground if the city didn't pay for it? But citizens are using crowdfunding in an activist way to create resources to protect and care for their own community, not just funding small businesses. So a little research. Had to go into the academic on you for a minute here. So homophily effects are we basically invest in people that behave and act like us. Indians invest in Indians, Pakistanis invest in Pakistanis, Chinese Americans invest in Chinese Americans, people from Yale on the East Coast invest in people from Yale on the East Coast, Stanford runs the universe, sorry to Berkeley. Well, I mean, there's the sense that if you're not if you're not a white male or an Asian American from one of the top 20 B schools, good luck in the venture capital game. Your odds of getting venture capital in America are less than the odds of your child getting accepted to Harvard. Literally statistically true. So I get so angry at the conflation of venture capital finance and crowdfunding. They're not the same animal. If we're talking microfinance, microenterprises, SME finance, we're not talking about the very small slice of companies that are going to get it. But the interesting thing is, does crowdfunding change the gender bias in finance? Between 1% and 5% of venture capital flows to women. 40% of companies are founded by women. Companies with women founders and women board members are statistically more profitable than companies with all male boards. Women increase profitability. So despite the data, no access to capital. So there's been some research. It's called choice homophily. Choice homophily basically is, I'm going to be an activist. I'm going to go on the platform, and I'm going to find people that have a passion similar to mine. So there's a lot of data that shows that women angel investors are aggressively and significantly investing in women tech founders, trying to reverse the lack of women participation in technology. So that's called choice homophily. Signaling effect. There's some research that shows that investors are making quality decisions about your company based on the amount of money you're asking for. I'm not going to oversimplify a very complex body of literature, but the simplest takeaway is you're not asking for enough money. Oftentimes people are underestimating and people are making negative quality decisions based on that. There's also data the average crowdfunding contribution is a 3,000-mile gap, which doesn't make any sense. So it basically means money's flowing coast to coast between the West and the East Coast. But if you're within 25 miles of the founder, then your behavior shifts to a social impact investor. So if you know the guy, you're going to invest in it because you like Sam. If it's somebody on the other coast, you use more rational decision making. I'll skip information dispersal in the interest of time. Sophistication of the crowd. Is the crowd dumb or is the crowd smart? Talk about the wisdom of the crowd. First of all, the crowd is incredibly good at detecting indications of fraud. Any regulars in the room, the crowd works. It doesn't prevent it, but there's data that shows that the crowd can detect indications of fraud within 48 hours pretty consistently in most cases in most countries. Then this whole idea of corporate innovation. So there's research happening in all those fields. The problem is crowdfunding economics, finance, entrepreneurship, community economic development, sociology, linguistics, communications theory, new venture finance. It doesn't have a home in academia yet. So you have to sort of, or law, shouldn't forget the lawyers in the room. So where does it fit in this whole field? There's not a lot of consistency in that. So national agenda, if Richard ran the universe, here's what I would say we need to do. Crowdfunding Bill of Rights. What are your rights as a person who's making a donation on Indiegogo or Kickstarter? What should I expect? That should be something CFPA comes up with and helps understand what is rational. Same thing with equity investing. The trade associations need to be the voice of what is acceptable practice. I know I'm pushing out an envelope here, but let's just have fun. Investment education is a huge concern. The vast majority of Americans have no clue what we're talking about. My Aunt Edna does not know how to read a term sheet. She has no idea at all what the nature of startups are going to look like. So if we're going to get the retail investor involved as an industry, we have to spend quite a bit of time and energy and resources educating people, which is part of what we're going to do, but not all inside of NextGen. Issuer education, how to do it well. Service provider education. I was talking to the chairman of a state CPA association who literally had never heard the word crowdfunding. Oh. There's a lot of education to be done there. CFPA needs more support. If you're not all members of CFPA, but you care about the industry, join today. And no, I'm not getting a commission check. But if you want the industry to succeed, support the group working to make the industry succeed. So I'm going to make a blatant statement. If you're not a member, join now. Up on the Hill, perfect example. I won't pick up, well, McHenry's staff, he was here. So McHenry yesterday had 5 of us in his office for different meetings, different times. And I was talking to Matt, who is an assistant, and said, "Can you guys just get a unified voice and like decide what's important as an industry, and just because there's no unity in the industry." So as an industry, we need to come together. Jobs Act 2.0 and Jobs Act 3.0. I have been saying for years, this crowdfunding will make sense in 10 years. 4 years in, I still think crowdfunding is going to make sense in 10 years. What I mean by that is, this is DC. We have a set of laws, we have a set of regulations, we're going to make the best of it given what we have. Given those facts, the SEC did what they did. I was yelled at the SEC many times. I was not as polite and diplomatic as Sam. Yeah. We got what we got. Everyone knows that Title III needs to be fixed. I'm pretty happy with Title II and Title IV and Title I, by the way. No one talks about Title I other than Kim Wales. I don't know if Kim's still here, but she's the Title I proponent. But I think there's going to be a Jobs Act 2, and there's going to be a disaster, there's going to be a media firestorm, there's going to be pushback, there's going to be a nightmare scenario. Grandmothers in Des Moines lost money. Oh my God, help the poor, helpless consumer. There's going to be regulatory pushback, and then everyone's going to calm down. They're going to fix it. They're going to fix the fix. So there will be a Jobs Act 3 in 2022 or whatever year we're in. The message I'm trying to send is we're in this for the long run. We're talking about a changing nature of capital markets and capital formation. I'm going to talk about just a couple of quick examples. I'm not going to show the video. This is how crowdfunding can actually make impacts outside of SME Foundation. The Girl Effect raised $1 million, got 300,000 Facebook likes and 30,000 Twitter followers in a one-month campaign. It's basically about providing birth control education to keep women in poor countries from becoming impregnated before they have the chance to finish their education. So the video's up here. I won't take the time to show it, but it's one of the best videos I've ever seen, literally. And one reason I want to talk about it, I'll be done in a minute, okay? Because it has an emotional appeal, but it's done in a graphical, visual language of millennials. This is a classic example. This is Amnesty International in London, which was basically considered a joke in the UK. They decided to use crowdfunding strategically, not to raise funds for themselves, but to do a turnaround of their brand, a turnaround of their company, if you will, or their franchise. Their goal was to raise between about $250,000, get 14,000 radios to get to people in Burma, because in Burma, all the government controls all the media and it's all a bunch of lies, so the only way to let people vote is to give them access to radios that have like Voice of America access. They wanted to get 4,000 donors, 1,200 on 12,000 new donors, convert prospects into givers, reactivate lapsed donors, make themselves relevant. Multi-channel marketing, here's what they got. Raised 300,000, 4,800 donations, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, crowdfunding isn't just about the money, folks. Crowdfunding is a mechanism for mobilizing resources and connecting to your community and making yourself relevant and sharing your passion. Could this be the rebirth of Amnesty, an emergence from the shadows of letter writing and reactive press releases? The rebirth of a global brand through a crowdfunding campaign. The BBC, you can call it soft power, you can call it giving people a choice. Frankly, you can call it what it like. It matters. That is what I want to leave you with. Crowdfunding matters, and it can change opinion, it can change people's engagement, and by the way, raise a few $100,000. But it's not just about the money. So with that, I've been asked several times, can we still call you to get information about crowdfunding? Yes. How many times did Aubrey use the term research in his speech? I think 6, if I was counting correctly. We like research inside of NextGen. We will continue to do research. In fact, we have some interesting research we'll be releasing soon. And also next week I'm releasing a major paper. It's taken me 18 months to finish, and it's a very exciting title called Small Business Utilization of Alternative Financing Crowdfunding in the United States. But it has demographic descriptive research and statistics about average age, gender, geographical dispersion, income, educational levels, college degrees, amounts raised. So those of you that are really boring people and like to read pages of charts of data, look forward to a fun paper next week. So with that, I thank you and I look forward to working with you in the future.